All right. Well, welcome, hopefully welcome back to Busy Reading Romantasy. I am Callisa, and have the pleasure of being here today with Alyssa from Stories and Spoilers podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, we kind of have where we met through a group for book podcasters. And Alyssa always shows up with
Mhm.
like the best energy. She's always there supporting absolutely everyone,
Thank
and
you.
I love it off the bat. So we decided to get together
Yeah.
and share some of our top romantasy recommendations. It was really funny. She was very sweet and actually brought up sharing contemporary romance, and first of all, I had to look it up because 'cause I'm terrible at, like, the different book genres, and I was like,
It is totally
"Oh,
cool.
I don't really read that," but we worked it out,
Yeah.
and I'm very excited. I tried to pull a bunch of different stuff, and we're also doing a bit of an episode swap, so we're gonna give 3 recommendations here, and then we will give 3 recommendations over on her channel, so be sure you check that out. Because I tried to pick, like, a wide variety of things that are
Okay.
very fun and not like the ones everyone is talking about. ACOTAR is not in this list for me. We've talked a lot about
Yeah.
that.
ACOTAR is like the Oreo of romantasy. I feel like it's really good for like a bit. You could do make brownies and you can make cake with it. ACOTAR, I think, is great. I read the first book, I read the second book. I look forward to reading the rest of the series, but there's so many other independent fantasy authors out there. There's so many
Mhm.
like amazing fantasy stories out there that have romance and adventure and comedy and there's no there's like there's a lot out there related to fantasy. So ACOTAR is great. You can't eat Oreos every day. Like we
Yes,
need to try different things. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Um,
100%.
all right. So my very first pick, and also
Mhm.
disclaimer, I ironically ended up with all trilogies as well. So they're all complete series, which is
Ooh,
very nice that you don't have to be waiting for more books to
okay.
come out. Um, and so then
Mhm.
a little asterisk, it's been a while since I've read most of these. I just know that I like them, even if I don't have all the
Okay.
details. So the first one that I really, really wanted to talk
I'm the same
about.
with mine as well. One of my recommendations I read in high school. So sorry
There you go.
guys, it's been
Okay,
a while, but it
perfect.
was one of the best fantasies I ever read.
Yeah,
So
it
sometimes it's a
is.
minute. It's been a minute.
It is what it is. I was, like, zoned out looking at, quick summaries before all of this, but my very first, recommendation is the Caraval series. So it's Caraval, Legendary, and
Ooh.
Finale. Are you familiar?
I've seen those covers on social media. So
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's like I know most books by either the cover or the author,
Mhm.
or sometimes I hate to admit it, sometimes I know a book by a certain scene that's like
Fair.
infamous. But
Mhm.
I have heard about that series. If I had to sum it up in 3 bullet points from what I've heard from an outsider,
Yeah.
um, lost sibling or friend,
Mhm.
fantasy, edgy, dark male love interest.
Yeah.
And those are the
Yeah.
3 bullet
There you
points I
go.
have about that series.
That's pretty solid. I am a
Yes.
sucker for like a good kind of like dark carnival. I think it's
Ooh,
just so much fun. This world
okay.
is so vibrant. Like I kind of think of like
Hmm.
Disney World, but like with just crazy magic stuff going on.
Like Cirque du Soleil? Is it like a dark, sexy
Yes.
Cirque du Soleil situation?
Yeah, I feel
Okay.
like that's, like, a
Okay.
good way, um, and so it's this kind of, idea that you get this ticket, you get invited to play, and there's this grand prize, you'll get a wish, right? But you have to follow all the clues, or some people like to
Wow.
just show up and, like, shop for their little magic potions. It's a choose your own adventure, um, and I
Okay.
think it's cool because you get a dynamic of you were right, it's about sisters. One sister gets sucked off on her adventure, and the other sister you have, like, the bold, sassy, sexy sister, and then you have the one who's a
Ooh,
little more reserved, doesn't quite wanna be there, just wants to get her sister and go, and, of course, it's, like, never that easy. And the fun thing is, like, you can't trust what's happening. So you might be reading one thing, but it's not. really what it
Ooh,
is because it's part of the trickery of the carnival. So I just think that's like super, super fun.
that sounds
Um,
really good. It's kind of
yeah.
giving the sibling element where they kind of split up and do different things. It's kind of giving
Mhm.
the book equivalent of like Arcane on Netflix.
Mhm.
If you like fantasy and you like darkness and like one sister goes in one direction and the other one has to go down like a darker path, I highly recommend that show. Like, I
Oh,
love when
okay.
you can read a book and then find a show or a film that has similar vibes,
Yeah.
because sometimes you just want to see it on, oh, like there's so many times you just want to see it on screen. Just hearing that, I could easily imagine like one sister falling in love with one of the guys who's like wonderful and enchanting, but then he transforms into something else and he's not what she thought he was. And like next thing you know, the other one goes on like a darker path, and then they meet up years later and it's like they're different people.
Mhm.
Something like
Mhm.
that. And also finale, the third book sounds like it must come to a pretty intense conclusion to have that title in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, that's one of the really fun things about this series, and as it progresses, it kind of you get that character development of the one sister that, kind of essentially starts as a damsel in distress, and she really learns how to fight for herself and protect herself and make choices. Um, and then it rolls into a bigger plot around kind of they call them the fates, and kind of it reminds me of, like, old gods type thing of they're coming out, they're
Ooh,
causing havoc, and they need to put a stop to it or else, like, crazy stuff is gonna happen. So
oh
it
my
there is
God.
quite the finale.
That sounds really, really good. I love that. What was your favorite part about reading that series specifically, like for romantasy? What was it? What was
Mhm.
that like element that makes it one of your top picks?
I think because it's such a it I would count it as, like, a slow burn, and there's, like with the trickery of Caraval, you are like, "They have to be in love," and then you're like, "No, he's an actor, he was just doing his job, it's part of the game,"
Ooh,
and you're like, "But no, they're in love,"
oh my
So it's always
God.
that, like, give and take. I'll say it's not too spicy, it's not too explicit from what I
Okay.
remember, so it's great if, that's maybe not your flavor of books, but the romance element is there, and you get both sisters in different types of romance, and you kinda can't tell, are they good? Are they bad? Is this fake? Is this part of the game? Is it like, what's going on? Yeah.
That sounds so good. When you said you couldn't tell if he was like, is he in this with her? Are they 100% together or not?
Mhm.
Have you heard there's this it's from this film called Crimson Peak, and it
I've
has the
heard
guy
of
who
that.
plays Loki in it.
Gotcha.
There's a scene where like the female main character is like, "You poisoned me. You tried to kill me." And he's like, "I did, and I'm sorry." And she's like, "You told me you loved me." And he's like, "I do." But he did all these horrible things. And she's like,
Yeah.
"But why?" Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It If a fantasy doesn't make me feel like torn about the love interest, like I want to feel like I'm rooting for you, but also like I need to understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Mhm.
It gets kind of boring when like the romantic lead is just pure hearted and like can do no wrong and like has never made a
Right.
mistake. Like I
Yeah.
love a good I love a good male main character, female main character who's made mistakes throughout
Mhm.
the series, and then you
Mhm.
see them kind of like have to either use magic or like their wits to figure out how to get out of it or how to solve the issue with the main character. I love that. Like
Yeah.
I love that. Which brings me to my recommendation. Haha,
Awesome.
the segue. Um, so it is a short story, and I believe it was on Kindle Unlimited. I don't know if it still is.
Okay.
But it's called The Seven Deaths of the Saint by Alex
Ooh.
Harrow, and it is a fantasy. I would say it's fantasy romance, but it also plays around with time.
Ooh.
And the best way I can describe it is the female main character is a warrior who is in a time loop, and their partner is also somewhat in that time loop, but they are self aware. So they know that they're in a time loop. Meanwhile, the main character is not aware they're in a time loop, but they're in this constant state of like, I must win this, war. I must win this fight. Nothing can hurt me. And then you find out there's a cost for this loop.
Oh,
It
that
is
sounds so
so
good.
good. It is so it was the first short story I ever read that was romantasy, that the romance felt earned. Like
Oh, okay.
it felt like at the end in such a short story, I felt like I read like a Lord of the Rings in
Wow,
under
okay.
100 pages. That's what it felt like.
Oh
It
my
felt like the
gosh.
level of Lord of the Rings, the world building. It was, and it's like you have to save yourself, and you want the lovers to be together, but at the same time, at what cost?
Right.
So it was such a quick, good fantasy.
Mhm.
And there was a level of tragedy that made it feel even more high fantasy. Like the stakes were high and there wasn't a lot of time. I can't recommend it enough. Like the book tropes in that single story is like definitely a female main character with a dagger. You obviously have the time loop. You have kind of dual point of views, and you also have flashes to the past, flashes to previous
Okay.
loops and why certain things didn't work and how can we change it now. So good.
Oh, that
So
is so
so
fun.
good.
I nerd out about
Yeah.
kinda, like, time stuff, time play.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think it's a tricky trope just because if you do it too much, it gets confusing.
Mhm.
And if you don't explain enough, it kind of just becomes repetitive, like obviously the same moment over and over again. This
Right.
book wasn't like that. It
Yeah.
felt like every single time she picked up a weapon, every single time, like this, she would describe what she was feeling. It almost felt like she was taking up the role that like male main characters take, where it's like they're very strong and stoic and nothing can really hurt them. In this version, the male love interest is the more vulnerable, always caring for her after every fight, always patching her up.
Oh.
And he begins to get tired of it. He's like, "Oh my god, like this keeps going on. Like I can't keep doing like seeing you go through this." Oh, it was so good. I can't recommend this story enough. Like I read it earlier this year and it was honestly one of the best fantasies I've read in a while. Like it brought me back in the game, 100%.
Oh, that's
So
so
yeah, I hope
exciting.
you read it. I hope everyone reads it.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
Okay.
so, so good.
Is the time loop, like, the main fantasy element, or do they have, like, any sort of powers or magic or, like,
No,
fantasy
it's almost
system?
like a curse. It's like
Oh,
a
okay.
curse. Like the
Yeah.
way she lives and she has to serve this like king. She's almost like at his will in a way. And it ties
Okay.
into the loop. I don't want to dive too deep, but it's almost
Fair,
like
fair.
the loop, the loop and the curse are intertwined in a way.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my god, and, like, just the devotion she has to this king in not a romantic way, almost like she's
Mhm.
tied to the curse, so she's tied to him and, like, generations of him,
Oh,
and her love
interesting.
interest is just like, "Oh my god, like, I want this to stop." It was just so good, It was
Yeah.
and it discusses power and the power of love, the power of being so devoted to someone who wants to be a martyr, like, what would that be like? To
Mhm.
be in love with a hero who sees no problem with dying over and over again, like, what would that be like? So so
Yeah.
good.
Oh,
It's so
that's so
good,
awesome.
you know?
I think
Yes.
that's what gets me really excited about fantasy is that the options are endless, and I know there's a lot of, like, retellings on maybe, like, the classic fantasy tales and things like that, so I get really excited when you kind of see new things where you're like, "Oh, I've never read that before," or you don't know, like, what's possible in this world or that's what gets me really excited, and that sounds like that definitely ticks a box for me because I have not read anything like that, so
It's unique. I love it. I think the best part about fantasy for me is, like, that sense of, like, you're losing yourself in the story, like,
Mhm,
you are part of the cast. You are just as invested in the love story, almost like a fly on the wall, but a
mhm.
really good romance to me is almost like you are the main character. Like, you are, like, right there, like,
Yes, yeah.
Jackson and the Lightning Thief, that was my first, like, as a kid, like, reading a book. The first chapter of that book is the author telling you to stop reading. It's dangerous to read. If you continue to
Mhm.
read, he's warning
Yeah.
you. that was such a creative, like for me, that's an iconic first
Yeah.
chapter of a book. To be
Yeah.
told to stop,
That gives me Lemony Snicket vibes. I loved
yeah,
those.
it, oh my gosh. And talk about tragedy. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like that whole series was just like my tummy was in knots. Like I
Mhm.
always say that like my stomach gets upset when I'm super anxious because I just feel like I'm as wound up as the characters. Like I'm just as stressed
Mhm.
for them as if they were real people.
Mhm.
I'll honestly like between Percy Jackson and the series of unfortunate events, even like Cassandra Clare's series, The Clockwork Princess,
Mhm.
there's something about young adult fantasy sometimes that is so immersive to me.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know what it is, if it's about like childhood whimsy or like about like Greek tragedies or about like steampunk in the case of Cassandra Clare, like it
Mhm.
was so fun to like gallivant with these characters as a young adult. Like it was so fun to like read books during your lunch break at school and like on the bus ride home, you know what I mean? Like under your
Mhm.
covers at night, you should be sleeping.
Mhm.
Like there was a fun to it, you know? And as an adult, obviously you can still have that, but it's just different. It's more of like an escape now
Mhm.
versus then it was like the Narnia door. Like you could go, but you have to come back.
Yes.
As an
Mhm.
adult, I don't know. It feels different. Like the books stay with you. Like
Yeah,
a good book
fair,
stays with
fair.
you
And I think
100%.
it's, part of that I wanna say maybe is, like, attributed to, like, the scope of life, right? When you're still in your teens, you haven't experienced, at least for someone like myself, like, I didn't have these crazy adventures where I needed to, like, stick up for myself or have all this, like, crazy growth. Now as an adult, like, I can, I think, more pinpoint I have the experiences to be, like, to see myself more in each of these characters and, like, maybe attribute how I've overcome things. I can overanalyze it more rather than being like, "Oh my gosh, this is great," you know?
I get that. I
Yeah.
think also with being an adult, I'm almost scared to reread books that I read as a kid because I'm
Oh,
scared that it won't be as good as the way I
yeah,
remembered it. Like
yeah.
my little brother's reading Percy Jackson right now. I thought about rereading book one just so we could talk about it, you
Yeah,
know? I'm a little scared. Like I'm a little
fair.
scared. Like what if I read it and it's not as good as I remember,
That's
you
a good
know?
point, yeah, yeah.
It's a little scary
Interesting.
because I'm
Okay.
different. The book is the same,
Yeah.
I'm different, you know?
Ooh,
So,
yeah,
yeah, that's
that's
the
deep.
thing is like exact right? Like I can return to the world. It's almost like Narnia when they went back to the world but they were older
Mhm,
and they couldn't go back I think once they hit like 18. That was one of those fantasies where like I do like to write in my free time. I'm not a fancy writer. I don't have any I haven't written a book, but like there are times when I finish a book and I'm like, I would have written that differently, you know,
mhm,
or like I'm inspired by this scene. Like what would happen if it went in this direction? Hence like, fan fiction and the fantasy of that as well. But like there is something so magical about reading a book and it's almost like it inspires you to dream and like
mhm,
find other books that have similar tropes or that actually go in the complete opposite direction. Like I love
mhm.
stories about villains. I love
Mm,
those. I
mhm.
love a good villain that like is not going to get better.
Yeah,
This is who they are,
yeah, yep.
and they're not going to tell you their whole plan. They always tell you the whole plan at the end of the book, like, I'm going to do this to you, and the damsel's in the castle. No, like, I want a villain where it's like Klaus from the Vampire Diaries.
Mm, yeah.
I want him to have a reason why he does what he does,
Mhm,
and I don't want him to stop doing what he's doing, you know?
mhm. Oh, yeah, I love that.
That's what I want.
I'm a sucker
100%.
for, like, embrace your inner darkness, and you're just, like, kidding yourself if you're still pretending that, it's all the
Exactly.
high and mighty and, I
It's so
love
much
that. Good.
better in the dark. It's so
Oh,
much
yeah.
better. Like
I
I
knew I
I love
liked you.
it. I'm like,
Um,
why not? Yeah. I
yeah,
need more
no,
fantasies like that. I don't feel like
absolutely,
there are many
absolutely.
like that. Have you read many? Like with the where the villain is the main character, but not in a
Mm.
way where they get better or like they're getting fixed. Like it's just like this is who they are.
No. The most that I can attribute to that is we just read Hooked by Emily McIntyre, and it wasn't
Mm.
necessarily the main character, but who was Wendy, but Hook, James himself. Um, and I thought that was brilliant because that was like the ta-da! The hand things get me every
Oh my
time.
god, I love it.
Um,
They no, I've heard of Hooked, so that's a
yeah,
good celebration. Those
yeah.
little balloons
It
were a good sign. I've heard Hooked was really good,
it
like
was the concept of, like, you're everyone is a villain in someone's story, and, like, owning up to that and realizing you can see that and it doesn't change who you are, and, it is what it is, so, yeah, I
yeah.
really enjoyed it. I'm excited to jump into the rest of those.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
think it's good to be bad. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to just be evil. Like, it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Like, I think there's a saying where it's like, if you stare into the darkness, it stares back. Like, if you stare into the
Mhm,
abyss, it stares back.
mhm,
I would love to read a book where, like, the villain is
mhm,
terrifying and they fall in love with someone that they think they can't have, but their love interest is also terrifying. Like, I would
mhm.
love for them to mutually be just bad people,
Yeah, yeah,
fun doing bad things. Like,
yeah,
I love
yeah,
that. Or
yeah.
maybe the good person isn't that good.
Mhm,
Like, maybe the protagonist was
yeah,
actually not that good of a person. Like,
yeah.
I love
Ooh,
that.
that
Yeah.
actually that reminds me of I just filmed a few days ago, we talked about the Her Soul to Take trilogy, um,
Ooh. Yes,
and
with the
so that
skull guy.
one
Mhm.
yeah, and those, it's their demon romances, and the second one in particular, Juniper, she had a rough upbringing, she's a rough person, and we talked about that, how there's no, um, regret, it's not made bad, and the love interest, he's not trying to change her, he's meeting her where she's at,
Mm.
and, like, there was a lot of writing about how she had built all this armor, and he was the first person to, like, look at the mess, the darkness, and say, "No, I'm here. I'm here to stay. I'm not running around. Like, let me in." And I was like, "Oh, it's beautiful." I highly recommend it. I have so many good things to say about that
I
series.
love it. Wait,
Yeah.
what's the name of the second book?
S Her Soul for Revenge. Yeah.
Her Soul for Revenge.
Yeah,
Ooh,
yeah, and
ooh,
then the
okay.
last one
I like
is
that.
Soul of a Witch, and, like, just, like, this is, like, a little bonus one because I thought about mentioning it, but I just talked about it, but that one, so brilliantly written by Harley LaRue. It's each I didn't know going into it, each story is the same essential timeline from different perspective, and she does it so beautifully, you're not bored about, like,
Wow.
you get different perspectives that changes the story every time, and it's so good, and it's always different dynamics. So Raylan is the first, female who is very, like, happy-go-lucky, no sense of self-preservation. Then we get Juniper, who's hardened, she's gonna fight back, and then we get Everly at the end, who's taught that you don't have power, and she's, like, the most powerful. So all different dynamics, and, like, I can say enough good things about it.
Oh, wow. I mean, I think I tried reading book 1,
Mhm.
but there was something about when he mentioned, like, her smell and, like, they were trying to,
Mm.
like, spray things on her to make her smell, like, I guess they thought he was gonna eat her. I know I'm not I have to start I always find myself, like, describing books, and I'm like, I just described, like, off my mind, like, the last thing I remember from the story. And people stare at me, they're like, "What do you mean by that?" I'm like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, they wanted him to consume her. Yeah, she was supposed to be a sacrifice. Yeah,
yeah.
and then they
It
fall
is
in love. He
it
falls in
is
love with his meal.
it is darker, it is more way explicit. You read some things in this
Yeah,
book, so
yeah,
forewarning,
I
but
love a good monster romance.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not I'm not judging it.
yeah.
I read a if we're speaking about spicy fantasy, that is still I guess the question is if it's spicy fantasy, it's still set in the modern day, but it has
Mm.
monsters in it, like speed dating.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Somewhat. A there was a female main character. She's like a curvy female main character, and she's really tight on money. And she ends up meeting a red man. He's like all red, and he like can change himself to look more human, but in his real form, he's just red. He's got like big
Mm,
horns and stuff like that. He can transform himself to look more human, and they end up
mhm,
meeting. And it's it. I would consider it sex work just because she does fill out a list of like what she is and is not comfortable with, and she
Gotcha.
does work with a network to find him, and he
Mhm.
does pay her for her services.
Gotcha.
But his powers, where we eat food, he has to do a certain sexy thing to
Oh.
survive. It's how
Oh.
he survives. It's like it's how he lives. So
Yeah.
when he meets her, he's like, "Oh my god, I'm literally starving," and he ends up doing a sexy thing with her, and that is the only way he can survive.
Oh, I love that concept.
Yeah, and he pays for this because it's it's for him. It's like she's perfection. I
Yeah.
need this, please. And she's
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, this is so fun." So she does it, and she's like, "Okay, do I do anything to you?" He's like, no. The whole point is for me to enjoy you in this
Yeah.
moment. I'm not getting
Yeah.
any. This is enough for me. I was like,
Yeah.
it was giving what is it? Helper's high when you get the helper
Mm.
high, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
A monster romance, and it wasn't like too much. Like it builds, and you do get really good clear communication as well. When he crosses a boundary about like, I will do this and you will do that, she
Right.
shuts it down and she walks away and they communicate, which I love.
Oh, okay.
Even in
Yeah.
fantasy, there should still be
Yeah.
communication,
That's
like
great.
the alpha male thing where it's like, I control you and you cannot leave, and it's very Beauty and the Beast-esque.
Mhm.
I love Beauty and the Beast, but as an adult, I can see it and realize he was a little territorial, and he didn't always let
Yeah.
Belle speak up for herself.
Yeah.
So, and when he finally did, that vulnerability is what made me fall in love with what I now know is monster romance.
Mhm.
Who doesn't
Fair,
want to
fair.
be a girl who gets gifted a whole library?
So yeah.
Who
Oh,
doesn't want
yeah.
that?
Yeah. Oh,
Who doesn't
absolutely.
want that? And then Jason Momoa just happens to be this like burly man who just wants to love you forever and be there for
Yep.
you. And he
Um,
becomes a wolf at night sometimes. Like,
you're
it's
like,
not a big deal.
I
It's not a
guess,
big
like,
deal.
I can live with this, I think.
I think it's gonna be okay. I
Yeah.
I dipped my toe into monster romances and now I can't.
Okay.
I'm in the ocean. I
Mhm,
dipped my toe and
mhm.
now I'm in the ocean. I have no
Oh, yeah.
boat. I live
Yeah.
here now.
We're
That's
just here. Yeah.
someone's
Yeah.
gonna Photoshop me like at the bottom of the ocean, just surrounded by like
Surrounded
a
by
monster romance. Even Midnight in the Corner, he's like, please let me out. Like,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
going on?
yeah,
But yeah, that's 100%
yeah.
true. I
Amazing.
will find the title
Okay.
because I
Perfect.
just read it. I literally just read it. I was scared to mention because I was
Yeah.
like not scared
Yeah.
to admit it. It was actually super, super good. I have no regrets. It was called Deal with a Demon by
Ooh,
Amy
okay.
Wright. And the cover looks like a girl, and like she's behind a city, and it's this
Mhm.
tall red man with with horns, and
Mhm.
he's like holding her face, and it's
Ooh,
animated. It's super cute. It's on Goodreads, and it's from a series called Monstrous Deals #1. I
okay.
have not read the other books, but this book
Okay.
was quite good. It was quite
Awesome.
good.
Awesome.
I love,
I
but
love that. I love that.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes, if you
perfect.
ever want LGBTQ recommendations as well, I am your girl. I am a proud member of the community, and
Yeah.
I love a good like sapphic romance or like fantasy romance,
Mhm.
even a dark romance. I'm down for. Like I read
Awesome.
a book called, I think it was called like The Devil in Her. It was something like that. Or it was like The Devil in Me, and it
Yeah.
was a girl. She was in a really abusive marriage, and then the girl next door moves in and ends up being a pretty a pretty flirtatious person.
Mhm.
And I imagined her as Aubrey Plaza for some reason, like because they're
Gotcha.
adults and everything. But I imagined her as Aubrey Plaza for some reason. But
Yeah.
she's supposed to have like very like dark hair and like elusive features and very like attractive. And long story short, she's hanging out with the main character and she oversees someone talk to her in a bad way,
Mhm.
and she may or may not get vengeance for this person,
Ooh.
and
Okay.
she may or may not have paranormal strength and not
Oh,
really have issues. For her, like, men are like, if they hurt women, she's like, okay, well, like, why not? You know what I mean? Like, I support
yeah.
women's rights and I support women's wrongs. That book
Yes.
is so good. I think about it all the time. Like, that was a book where the villain, you want to call her that,
Mhm.
it doesn't get better. It doesn't get better,
Gotcha.
but you
Yeah,
also
yeah,
didn't know how evil she was until the end.
yeah. Okay. Oh, amazing. I
And the
love that.
cover is like a girl in all she's like in all it's like a red background with the girl's silhouette and like black
Yeah.
horns.
Okay. There you go.
Super, super good.
Oh,
Yes. I don't
that's
know.
awesome.
There are
Yeah.
so many books that no one talks about.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, I know. We
100%.
we
You know
could go on
what
all day.
underrated?
Yeah.
No, we 100% could. I'm trying to find it because it was one of those books I wish more people talked about. Oh, I
Mm,
found it. It is called When the Devil by Amy E. Murray.
okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
So good.
I
So
can't wait to
good. I've
check all
lost
these
track of
out.
the books recommended. But it was so good. There are
Yeah.
so many awesome, like sexy, dark books out there, even
Mhm,
cozy romances too.
mhm. Yeah.
Have you read, oh my gosh, have you read any of the Kimberly Lemming books yet?
No.
Ooh, you have a storm coming. You have to read
I'm
them. They're so
excited, yeah.
good.
Okay,
Yes,
I will note
yes.
all these down.
You will
Um,
know when it's Kimberly Lemming when there's it's usually she may write other ones, but it's usually a young black female main character on the front and then a
okay,
mythical man. It's giving kind of a
gotcha.
wink to those like those cheesy romance covers. The guy,
Yeah.
he's like shirtless and he's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I love you. Yeah. And then they're like pressed up against a bookshelf and there's like a peach in his hand and his like nipples out.
Yep.
Exactly. Yes. It
Amazing.
gives
Everything
off
I've
that,
ever needed.
was it Fabio? Where he's got the
Yeah.
long
Oh,
hair and
yeah.
he's like, he's all tanned and ready.
Yeah.
Yes. That time I got drunk and saved a demon, I read that one. I have an episode about
Mhm,
that one. So good. And then that time I got drunk and needed a love potion at a werewolf.
mhm.
Both of these books are amazing.
I'm
Like
so
they're
excited to get into
wonderful.
those. Yeah. No,
Yes.
absolutely.
Even though they're a
Absolutely.
series, they could stand on their own. You could read book
Yeah.
two and not have a problem. But I
Yeah.
do recommend reading book one and then book two because there's a
Okay.
character in book one who's mentioned again in book two.
Okay. Noted.
So
Good to know.
super,
Yeah.
super good. And
Yeah.
they're fun, sexy. You get longing, humor, world building.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love
And
it.
there's a
But
dark
yeah.
mystery. There's like a
Oh,
mystery
okay.
in the two books.
Gotcha.
It's interesting. Book two is missing girls in the village, and they're trying to
Yeah.
figure out what monster stole the girls.
Okay.
And then book one is a curse that people are praying to what they think is a goddess, but it actually is a witch in a cave who is feeding off of all the prayers and all
Oh,
the like food everyone's been
yeah.
giving her. But she's really like a blood like she's like made of blood and bones, but she can use her magic to make herself look like all seeing sweet goddess, but she's actually just a big pile of bones and blood, and she's super
Gotcha.
scary. So
Oh,
it's giving Voldemort. Like her soul
okay.
is split into
Yeah.
different pieces.
Oh, that is
Oh my
exciting.
gosh. It is so if you try to
I
kill her,
love
you can't
that.
really kill her physical body. You have to
Yeah.
destroy an
Yeah.
object. But she has multiple temples
Yeah.
all over the place. You can't just
Okay.
kill her once. You have to kill her multiple times. It's very interesting.
Amazing.
Like,
Amazing. Okay.
yes,
Okay.
it's a
Well,
fantasy. It's fun, you
yeah.
know?
Speaking of Witch in the Woods, that brings me to my other nice little trilogy here, which is the
Ooh,
Serpent and Dove. I thought these are also fun.
I've seen these covers. Yes. Oh, they're so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
And I
tell me
love
more. Tell me more.
so this one is I pulled it because I love that it's witches, but it's more of a unique magic system. Kind of think she like sees these patterns and she can kind of sort through what she wants intentionally. I picture them as like little cords and you can pull the cords that
I
you
love
want.
that.
And it's very like an eye for an eye, but you don't know how it's going to manifest, right? So like you can take oxygen away from your opponent, but maybe that something happens to you that's like perceived as equal. So it's a little shifty sometimes because you don't know how it's going to work, like, or how the payoff will be paid. But I just like anything that's unique And, like, that's a little different, especially with, like, good vivid imagery of, like, you imagine her seeing all these patterns and being like, "Okay, I'm gonna pick this one," and then stuff starts happening. I
Yeah.
also do love how it's, similar to your first recommendation where it's a bit of a flip where we have the cinnamon roll main character, um,
Mhm.
not male main character, not necessarily like cinnamon roll, but he works for the church as more of kinda like a soldier, right? He's gonna protect against witches. He's very innocent because he's taken a vow to protect his, city. And then we get Lou, who's our main character, female main character, and she is more of like she comes in, she has to pretend that she's not a witch, she's getting caught, and,
I love
she
it.
kind of is the not so innocent female that's like, "Hey, we can have some fun, it's all okay," which I
I
always love
love
because that's not the traditional. A lot of times I think you see more of the, like, innocent female being like, "Oh, no," and the man comes in like, "Ooh, I'm gonna teach you how to do everything." So it's always fun when
Ah,
it's flipped.
yeah.
There are a few
I've never
more.
kissed anyone. I've never held
Yeah.
someone's hand before, and I'm 29. I'm like,
Oh,
"Excuse
yeah.
me? You've never liked anyone ever?"
Right, right. No, this one definitely has, like, forced proximity, and it does get a
Ooh.
bit more, spicy than, the average,
Yeah.
so that's fun. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of themes around, like, self-acceptance and breaking kind of, like, the generational curses, again, as you're progressing through the story. Um, the land just, like, expands, so you're finding out why is there 2 different types of witches, where did they come from, and how did it happen? There's a whole backstory there. There's all these, like, crazy entangled familial lines. The only not spoiler, I'll say is that mermaids get thrown in at one point, are like, they're part of this world. So,
I love
there's a lot of,
mermaids.
like, fun, wild stuff that you learn about this, but it's very much in the first one, it's kind of like almost like a forced marriage, and she's pretending she's not a witch, and she is right next to the guy that hunts witches. So it's very,
Oh
very
my
fun.
gosh. The
Yeah.
stakes are high. Okay, I
Yeah.
really wanna read this because it sounds like, one of my favorite shows that is now all on Netflix, guys. If you have
Oh.
Netflix, please watch it. When the moment you mentioned strings, they call it, in the show, they call it a weaver when you can create spells, like, you can make
Mm,
your own unique spells, and
mhm.
she almost pulls strings from the air.
Oh.
Spoiler alert. But yes, it's that's way later. But the show is called, A Discovery of Witches,
Oh,
and
I
it was
literally just watched the first episode last week.
you need you will love season 2 and 3. I'm rewatching the show with my partner, but man, when I tell you I heard that it's like a new it's not a new trope, but I recently heard about it where it's like she runs and he chases and it's kind of like
Oh,
sexy but also like it's forbidden because
I
like why
love
would you want
that.
to run from your partner? But it's
Yeah.
actually really hot. Like when he tells her he's
I
like
love it.
walk past me slowly and she begins to walk past him, but he's a vampire, right? So he
Yeah.
can smell her and he can hear her
Yeah.
heartbeat. It's like hunting. What I love is that
Oh.
Diana in this show and in the book she's very like strong-willed, she's incredibly educated, she's got her
Mhm.
doctorates already, like she's not this young person who doesn't know what she wants and like doesn't understand her power and is afraid of who she is as a person. She knows that like she's capable of protecting herself as a human being.
Mhm.
So her powers as a witch and like her will as a person, all of it combined, her like fierceness for love of like her family and later her partner, it was one of the best like book to show adaptations I've ever seen.
Mhm.
I thought it was really well done. And if anything, I preferred the show over the book. When it comes
Oh,
to
okay.
fantasy, it's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard to put fantasy in on the screen.
Yeah.
Obviously things like Lord of the Rings, Twilight, to some extent they had the funds to go big. But
Yeah.
with this show, they didn't need a lot. Like the magic
Okay.
felt real. Like the way that she would like
Yeah.
drop papers and then use her magic to get them all back up,
Mhm.
little things like that, like the house she lives in or like lives in with her family, it moves, it's alive.
I
That
love a
is
good
so
sentient
magic.
house. Like
I love a house that's alive. Like, I
yeah,
love a house
yeah,
that's, like, real and present.
yep,
But no, I think that that show, if you love fantasy and you wanna obviously, you love to read, but also maybe you wanna watch a show
yeah,
with, like, your partner or your
yeah.
friends, A Discovery of Witches is
Oh,
amazing. It is
that is great.
so
Okay.
good. Like, with a
I will
nice little
continue on.
cupcake, with a cup of tea, do it, do
Yeah.
it. It
Oh,
gets so much
absolutely.
better.
Okay.
Season 1
Yeah.
is like, I season 1 is like dipping your toe into the water.
Okay.
Season 2 is diving straight in, like
Oh,
full
that's
speed
exciting.
ahead. Like things
Yeah.
get a lot more intense. Yeah, like
Okay.
there yeah, it was really good. And then season 3 it builds on what you already care about, like the system of magic, how demons work, how vampires work, the
Mhm.
hierarchy of that. Also like what happens if you fall in love with someone who's a different type of creature than you.
Gotcha.
Um
Yeah.
how would that work in society?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay, I will have
So,
to check it out. So you
yes.
got we have more recommendations, believe it or not. We're just gonna
Alright.
continue talking. So this continues on Alyssa's channel. Do you want to let everyone know more about what you do in general and then where to find you?
Absolutely. So, me and Midnight, my co-host over here, we discuss books via spoilers and non-spoilers. So,
Mhm.
some episodes we do an entire episode going into book tropes, my favorite quotes, things like that. I'm going to start doing celebrity casting. So sometimes I read a
Ooh.
book and I have a celebrity in mind.
Yeah.
I'm going to start kind of pulling together collages on Instagram, but also mentioning them on the podcast. And I always make sure to give you a warning before I jump into spoilers. There is some books out there that I know folks don't necessarily want to read, but they do want to know what happens.
Mhm.
Honestly, those used to be my favorite like book talks on like YouTube when I was growing up. I loved hearing spoilers because there were
Mhm.
some books I just weren't. I was not going to read 500 pages about sadness. I was not going to do that,
Yeah.
but I did want to know what happened in the book. So
Mhm.
I am talking about you, a little life. I do not want to read that book, but I wanted to know what happened. So
Mhm.
I love hearing spoilers. And I also love having friends on my podcast. So there will be guest episodes. And also, I'm doing bookish confessions. So that's when people message me on Instagram and let me know what they do and don't like about books. And then
Mhm.
I share those anonymously on the podcast. And the last one we're doing soon is we're gonna do these things called, I think it's called like secret episodes. So it's when you get to hear all about a book, but you don't know what the title is, and then I reveal it at the very end.
Oh, that's exciting.
So it's
I
like a
love that.
blind date with a book.
Yep.
Yes. So if you do want to know what
Brilliant.
the book is called, I'll probably do it like in the middle of the episode. I'll tell you what the tropes are, what the vibes are, and then if you
Mhm.
do want to read it, I'll tell you the title. But if you want all the spoilers and you're like, I love the direction this is going in, but I
Mhm.
don't think I'm gonna read it, but I do want to know what happens. I will tell you everything. And then at the very end, I will reveal what the book title is. So yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I don't know.
Brilliant.
Like there's books out there that are just like maybe not your cup of tea, but
Yeah.
you do want to know what happens. Like
Absolutely.
Butcher and
Yeah.
Blackbird. I loved that book, but some people didn't want to read it. So
Fair.
I ended up just telling them like a few friends, like, hey, here's what happens in the book. And they were like,
Mhm.
that's so satisfying. I don't want to
Yeah.
read that. That was so satisfying.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Super exciting for me. But
Yeah.
yes, we're gonna discuss fantasy and everything on my podcast in a bit. So you can pop over there. But thank you so much for having me. And your podcast is the best. So
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
happy to
Thank
be
you.
here.
Yep, yep.
100%.
So we will also have all of her information down in the description, all the links and everything. So makes it
Yeah.
super easy. But I'm so excited to talk about the rest of our recommendations because this has already been so good. So thank you all for joining if you've got to this point. I post my episodes on Spotify and YouTube, and then you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. Those do get slightly different content, so I recommend if you want to see it all, follow both. And yeah, all right, on to the
Yeah.
next.
Sounds good.